Hello, my name is Thomas Bido. I work for a company called ICO Partners. We do a number of things, but the one thing I want to talk to you about today is crowdfunding. So I'm a consultant in the game industry. I consult about different topics, one of them being crowdfunding. And the reason I consult on crowdfunding is not because as a consultant I can make lots of money, but because I love crowdfunding. I backed a lot of projects on Kickstarter. I think the model is very interesting. I like it as a backer. I like it as a business person as well. And I'm a data person. I like understanding things through numbers. So even though I worked on a number of projects, and I'm going to talk about that experience, I also work through data and try to understand phenomena through patterns in the numbers rather than just my gut feeling and the headlines. And so when I talk about crowdfunding, I like always to do a little bit of a sanity check in terms of how big it is and what kind of opportunity it is in terms of size of the space. So these are all data that we gathered. It's subject to margin of errors. The first thing is the size of crowdfunding. So it's about $25 million a year. There was a drop from 2015. In many ways, I'm listing multiple crowdfunding platforms, but a lot of the data I'm gathering is through Kickstarter. Kickstarter is still by far the biggest crowdfunding platform for video games. You have about less than half of the games that are funded on Kickstarter are less than $10,000, and the other half is more than $10,000. And you can see there's like about 100 projects a year that get funded are between $10,000 and $50,000. There's about 25 last year that were between 50 and 100,000. And we have like 36 projects that were more than $100,000 a year. That gives you kind of like a scale of how much money all those projects are. Now I want also to talk about very generically about the platforms. Even though Kickstarter is the default I'm going to go back to, I want to talk about last year and what happened last year for crowdfunding. Last year, the biggest project in crowdfunding for video game was Ashes of Creations that raised $3.2 million. The second project that raised the most money on crowdfunding last year in video games was Noob, le jeu vidéo. How many people in the room have heard about that game? Wow, okay. They raised $1.5 million. And the third game was Phoenix Point that raised $760,000 on Fig. And so one point here is, like, platforms don't necessarily matter. You know, if you have the right community, then the platform is a tool to basically capitalize on that community, engage that community, and raise money. By default, if you don't know which platform to go, Kickstarter is the one that has the biggest brand recognition by far. And this is usually the platform that most people will go to unless they have specific reasons to go to the other platforms. So very briefly, to mention some of the others, Fig allow mixed crowdfunding. You can raise money for rewards, like on Kickstarter, and at the same time you raise money as equity into the project. This is a model that some people like. There's models that some people really hate, but this is an alternative. And overall, all the different platforms have different identities. The reason I love the fact that Noob made so much money and they made it on Ulule is because it illustrates that point very well. Ulule is a French platform that has a good brand recognition in France, and this is the second crowdfunding campaign they do on that platform. So all their fans. So I didn't explain. Noob is a web series. And they decided to do a video game of the web series, and that's how they raised that money. And so they did already first crowdfunding campaign on Ulule for the movie of the web series. And so doing a second time, they got the fan very involved and raised a significant amount of money. And you have other projects that were very successful on Indiegogo, for instance, the Schoolgirls and the Indivisible campaigns, both from the same studio. One of the reasons they went to Indiegogo was it was easier at the time for Japanese players and backers to pay through Indiegogo than Kickstarter. And so they had a huge audience in Japan, so they went to Indiegogo for that reason. So let's talk about the basic principles. If you've heard me talk about crowdfunding in your life in the past, that's the same thing I always say, but these are things that I think are very important. The first thing is, it's not about the likes, it's about the love. This is very important. You can have a project that a lot of people think it's kind of cool. You're not going to be as successful as a project which has fewer number of people that are really, really thinking it's awesome and that really love your project. It's about love. So whenever you have a project and you consider going to crowdfunding, this is something that's vital to everything you do, how you talk about the game, how you present it to your backers, the potential of it. Do you have people who love your game? The second principle is momentum. Momentum is very important for the success of a campaign. If you reach 20% of your goal in 48 hours, you are on track to be successful. And the thing is that the key moment in a campaign are the first 48 hours and the last 48 hours. So having a good start is vital. There's, after the first couple of days, where everybody's talking about your project and the fans are engaging other fans and it's the topic of the moment and you have maybe media coverage or things like that, then it dies out. And you go into a period of time where things are, you know, coming in, but at a very much smaller pace. So if you don't have that initial momentum, you make it harder on yourself. Then, if you have a game, you need gameplay. This is so important to show the game. Back in 2012, at the beginning of the success of video games on Kickstarter, you had a number of people going to Kickstarter with just, here's a concept, I'd kind of like to this is the kind of game I would like to make, and people were like, yeah, here's money. 2018, this is no longer possible, you need to show a game. You need, even better, if you have a demo of a game, you have much better chance to get funded. And last thing, there's 3 things that don't work with, you know, little like asterisks. 99% of the time. If it works for you, great. Don't quote me. Free-to-play games don't work on crowdfunding. Mobile games don't work on crowdfunding. You probably don't want mobile games to work because distribution is a nightmare, especially if you have a paid game. Giving access to that game to people is very difficult. And last thing is games for kids. It's difficult for parents to project themselves in the future and be able to say, this game that's going to be done in 1 year, my kids want it. If it's a kids game, it's much harder to pitch to your audience because you have a double audience, kids and parents. A couple of other principles that are, whenever I work on campaigns, this is the first thing I check in the communication plan and the way they want to talk and the way they present their campaign. It's how they talk about the stretch goals, how they talk about what they do with the money after they reach the initial goal they set. And so my rule number 1 is don't talk about it. And the rule number 2 is do not talk about it. There's nothing to gain about talking about your stretch goals. I was talking about that momentum that you need to keep. If you announce your stretch goal right from the beginning, you basically sabotage the most important announcement you can do down the line. You also move people's target in their mind. If your game is cool at $100,000, but you have a stretch goal at $200,000, that's really what they want. When they see that you are far from that goal, they get, you know, demotivated, they stop talking about it. Maybe they don't even back you. So there's no good reasons to announce your stretch goals. I'll go quickly on the campaign timings. This is something that's changed. I was hinting at that. In 2012, this was kind of the window of opportunity during your conception of your video game. You could announce your game when it was just in the concept phase, and maybe you could do a crowdfunding campaign at the time. And that could work. Then 20 years later, the expectations getting more sophisticated. People want more details about the games. They want to see more of the game. The window went from, you know, into pre-production into midway of the production of the game when you can do the crowdfunding campaign. And then 2 years later, it goes even further to the right. And then now we are about here. And I don't think it's going to move, but also it means that the opportunity to do crowdfunding is very specific. It's very difficult now to do a campaign for a game that you don't have anything on at the moment. So it's usually not a good solution to start a project when you have nothing. It's more a good solution when you are having, like, maybe you have a vertical slice, maybe you have a demo, maybe you have something that you can show that's representative of the final game that you can pitch and talk about, and then complement whatever money you have already spent. I'm not, sorry if it's depressing, if you expected to start from scratch. It doesn't work anymore. So let's move forward. That means also demos are, or simile demos, things you could give maybe to the press if you don't want to give to the players, are expected. It's also meaning that the biggest competitor to crowdfunding is not the platforms between each other, it's early access. Because you need your game to be much more advanced and polished before you can do a crowdfunding campaign. A number of people are just like, well, if it's that advanced and that polished and that ready, why not go into early access, And that means this is not, a good reliable source of early funding. This is also not as sustainable as early access in many ways. So early access has a longer life shelf. It's also meaning that, crowdfunding will match a number of projects that have certain identity. Whereas project would have strong brands associated to them, whether it's nostalgia, whether it's famous people, whether it's an IP that's a license or things like that. But also with projects that don't have early access as an option. Narrative game, point-and-click games are quite popular on Kickstarter, and one of the reasons is early access is not really an option for them. If you play one game, if you do a playthrough of a game, you don't go back to it. And so early access kind of like spoils the story, or you play through half of the story and you never come back again to it. So it's a bit more difficult. Don't get me wrong, I love crowdfunding. Crowdfunding does a lot of amazing things for you, but this is like sanity check. If you want to go there, this is the kind of thing you need to expect from that. The last thing is also something we see more and more, I think I should mention. This is more and more frequent to see crowdfunding campaign, not for the game, but for a component of the game. A mod, supporting new platforms, supporting some game features into the game. And that's still coming from that kind of like move towards the right. Maybe as you get closer to the launch, you realize we won't have the resources to add feature X, Y, Z. Maybe with crowdfunding we could. Marketing. So just talking about how you talk about your game around a crowdfunding campaign. It's all about the community. So this is another project I love because a lot of people don't know about Homestuck. How many people know about Homestuck, the video game? Like 2 people. They did $2.4 million, and 2 people in the room heard about them. This is a massive campaign. This is one of the biggest campaigns on Kickstarter for video games. And the reason you haven't heard about it is because it's based on an existing webcomic that's very popular with goth girls that live in America. And there's not many goth girls living in America in the room, I guess, except the one with the hat here. So the reason they were so successful is they had a community. They had a community ultra engaged, ultra dedicated, and that really wanted the project to happen. They had love, and that's something that you need to build before you actually launch your campaign. So this is one of the things that's so difficult with crowdfunding, but so valuable as well, is you need to build your community first. You need to have people who already love your project, already engage with it, already think it's really, really what they want, and then you can go do your campaign. So a lot of the work you will do is announce the game, talk about it, share screenshots, engage with forums, subreddits that are in that genre or in that community you know will like your game. And this will take you further. That line about multipliers and catalyst is so important. Many people, not as many as before, but still go into Kickstarter and say, here's my game on Kickstarter, and nobody knows about it, so nobody cares about it. It's a multiplier. So in the sense that if you have 0 people interested in it, by launching on crowdfunding, you will get 0 people who will back it. If you have tons of people, then the effect will be a multiplier that will be very positive. There's going to be a healthy phenomenon. So my rule of thumb is like you need to announce your game. Announce it, say it exists at least 2 to 3 months before launching the campaign. And if you can do that even earlier, even better. And the other thing is pick the people you talk to, pick the people you you present the game to, because you want people who love your game. You don't want to talk to people who are interested in video game. You want to talk to people who like this kind of game, because they want to love it and they want to back it. And it's we're doing very self-targeted marketing, very fine-tuned messaging, can really, really help you out. There's also a neat trick there, because you can look at the existing community you have. You can look at the number of fans you have on Facebook, the number of Twitter followers, the number of people you have in your newsletter, and kind of assess how many of them are really engaged, how many of them reply, how many of them like, comment, tweet, retweet, like and retweet, all these kind of things. And that gives you a sense of how big is your core. I worked on a campaign that had 50,000 followers on Facebook and failed miserably because none of them were interested in the crowdfunding campaign. They all were like, it's kind of interesting. They followed them because they heard about it, they wanted to know about the news, but they were not engaged. And that was a shock for the studio, because they really expected that 50,000 people community would follow them through and support the campaign. So if you know the number of deeply engaged people you have already in your community, and you know the average pledge is probably going to be a little bit more than the price of the game, then you know about your day one, roughly. You know how much money you will do into the first 48 hours. And if that's 20% of your goal, then you're ready. If it's lower than 20% of your goal, you are not ready. And you can keep talking, keep presenting the game, keep recruiting, keep talking to your base as well, and say, who do you know who would like that game? Where do you hang out online? Is there anyone I should talk to present that game in the media that you know would like that kind of game? And build it over time. The other thing is, whenever you communicate, have call to actions. Encourage people to follow you, like you, subscribe to whatever newsletters you have. Create as many paths as possible to capitalize on your communication. Don't announce it to the world and say, here's my game, and then don't have something behind that says, wishlist my game on Steam, follow us on Twitch, follow us on YouTube, all that kind of stuff. Always engage people. Always ask them to follow you. If you don't ask them, they won't do it. Engage early with your community. Ask them questions. Ask what they like. Ask them what kind of aspect of the games is something they're interested in. Because you know your game, but you know your game from the inside. They will know the game from the outside, and they will tell you what it is important that's in your game that you should talk about. I'm a big advocate for being transparent with your community as well. Tell them you want to do a crowdfunding campaign. Don't announce it. Make them look at your game like it's awesome, it's going to happen anytime soon, and then suddenly you ask for money. I think it's not helping your case. Whereas if you engage early and say, this is what we can do for now, we'd like to do a crowdfunding campaign down the line, you don't have to be specific. You can be vague if you don't know, but tell them. Be transparent as much as you can. It helps you fine-tune your message as well. Sharing your campaign early to your community, like showing them what's going to be inside, avoids the situation where you launch your campaign and people don't like some aspect to it. So, I thought the game was different. Or I thought, the game price would be different. Or I thought we would have T-shirts and art book, and there's nothing like that, Talking to them kind of like diffuse the worst situations you can run into a campaign before it even happens. I like tools that you can give to the community to help you promote whatever it is you're doing. So I'm talking about Thunderclap and Nancy. These are voice sharing tools that you go online and you can create a message that people basically commit to reshare on their Facebook or Twitter accounts. I could talk a lot about that, but these are two interesting tools. You can give them avatars, you can give them banners for them to go into the forums and say, I support that project. GIFs are so important in today's communications for video game. Make good GIF everywhere as much as you can and share them with your community so they can share them around as well. These are important and good tools. Talking about the campaign, you need to be visual. Don't make a wall of text. I've seen so many campaigns that try to explain the game. Don't explain the game, show the game. There's a thing that's even more and more common is like you have a complex gameplay system or a gameplay loop or something like that. Don't explain the loop. Show the loop. Do something like this. This is from Pathfinder Kingmaker. Like, this is the features of the game. This is visual. This is something that people can instantly understand and then automatically share as well. A couple of more examples of that. A can't remember this one, but it's an XCOM style game that has physics, so they illustrate the physics and what you can do into that game through this. This is a MMO with a Minecraft element. They explain all the different concepts through like images rather than wall of words. Your campaign page, make your short blurb and campaign image as easy to understand as possible. If you do like into something that's very in the lore of your world and kind of like confusing, people will not understand. You need to make the short blurb like, this is a game like this, this, and this, and be very to the point and very blunt about what the game is about. You can update certain things on Kickstarter, so you can update your page, and so you should, people don't like certain aspects of your campaign, change them over time. People want more details about certain aspects of the game, change them on the page. Update things as you go. This is a luxury you have. But just know that you can't update the page when the campaign is over. This is something that you can't touch anymore. I think you should also, very importantly, choose your battles. It's very easy to get into a crowdfunding campaign and be excited about it because there's an emulation that's really awesome. It's part of the reason I like crowdfunding so much. But it is also easy to lose the point. The point is to make a game, not a t-shirt. If you don't know how to make t-shirts, don't make t-shirts. If you don't know how to do art books, don't make art books. Really focus about things that are about the game and in the game. And you can find cool rewards that could be digital, and people will care about them as much as a freaking t-shirt. People might care more about having their name in the game than having a t-shirt. So this is something that's very important to keep in mind. A few things about the way the campaigns are built. So 1, 2, the image, the blurb are important things. The other important thing here is the little, on number 2 is like Project We Love from Kickstarter. These are not incredibly difficult to get. It's just a matter of contacting the Kickstarter team ahead of time, show them the project, and you increase your chance of them liking the project. If they have to discover your project, you are less likely to have the project you love. You can contact them at games@kickstarter.com, yes, or Mikael at Kickstarter.com as well. But this is not difficult to get necessarily, but you need to think about it ahead of time, and every little helps. This is a little badge of honor that people appreciate to see on their projects. Then use all the channels you have at your disposals. This is something that talk to all your friends, talk to your family, talk to people on Twitter, Facebook, all the channels. Newsletters are still a very useful tool that people find very, very efficient into crowdfunding campaign. Contact Kickstarter ahead of your campaign. They will help you. They will, they might take the time to, do a call with you to see how your product is and give you a couple of recommendations. Disclaimer, sometimes they recommend things I don't recommend, so, pick your battles. You should explore paid marketing, not necessarily spend like, hundreds of thousands of dollars into that, but sometimes you can do a couple of posts, super targeted, with the right niche, and pay for that, and still get, the interesting results for that. There's Google Analytics plugged into Kickstarter. I see lots of people not using it. This is a wasted opportunity. You should actually plug Google Analytics and see where people are coming from. You might discover there's a small web forum that loves your game you never heard about. Maybe going talk to them is going to have a multiplier effect that you didn't expect. And engage with your audience. Talk to them. Don't ignore them, and be patient as well. Always. And engage in a way where you hear them, but don't necessarily react in the second. Sometimes you can say, we hear you, we'll think about it and get back to you in 24 hours and tell you what we do. I've seen people ruin their campaign because they had a knee-jerk reaction where people will say, I really want this, and they were like, okay, we'll give it to you, and they ruin everything. And that's it for me. I try to run it quick. Is it okay on timing? Do I have questions? Can I do like one question, you think? I can do questions. Wow, I was quicker than I expected. So, questions. Oh, thank you.
Questions?
There's 2 questions there.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I was wondering was that I think one thing which is not communicated very often by Kickstarters is that there's always a possibility of failure. And I think this really caused a lot of trust in Kickstarter in general. And still, game developers not really communicate that when you that Kickstarter is not a pre-ordering platform. It's something you back up a project which maybe happens in 3 years. And yeah, do you think it's the duty of the game developers to communicate this more? Because I think no one really talks about the possibilities of failure.
So which side of failure you talk about? The campaign failing or the project never happening?
The project getting funded but never getting realized.
That's tricky because I think generally people don't think the game cannot happen when they run campaigns. I think it's part of the nature of crowdfunding that people understand that to a certain level. And I think what's important is I think there's always a section like, why are you going to Kickstarter? What's your risk? And people are like, oh, well, we've done that game 50 times and the risk is very limited. That's how everybody presents it. But the reality is, I think it doesn't hurt you to say that it has a chance of never happening, but the reality is everybody who's going into this kind of space, they think it's going to happen. So for them to fail then, the failure is bigger on them than the backers because it's their baby that doesn't come to fruition. So it's kind of like a tricky thing to really, you are not going to tell people there's a chance we fail because you don't even think about it. I think what's important is, as you go along, is try to stay true about the chance of happening. So if you go you make a promise to deliver a game in 3 years, and 1 year later you run out of money and you are struggling to find the solutions, I think you should be transparent about that. And people will hate you, but some people will actually acknowledge that you did the right thing by communicating that with them. That's always difficult. You don't go celebrating, making a big fanfare about your project and say it might fail.
Yeah. Well, you can have some more Q&A.
Okay. I'll be kicked out. We have as many questions as we want until I'm kicked out.
Okay, a speaker question.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to chuck in a couple of things. So obviously, we did do a Kickstarter campaign for the Rocky Horror game. And actually, it was free to play. And it was mobile.
Yep.
And it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And we did pass. But what was interesting about that was we found that you can't take the community, we found we couldn't take our community to Kickstarter. And the reason was that although we had the official Rocky Horror fan clubs in the US and the UK supporting us, there was a gap between the people who were fanatical and the people who loved Rocky. And there'd also already been a previous Rocky Horror-based experience that had succeeded, but then had not delivered. And we found that was a real problem. So how much research do you think people should be doing to avoid getting situations like ours, where, and we were, by the way, we were really close to Luke at the time. I know Luke personally, and so we had so much support from Kickstarter. It's ridiculous, and obviously with Michael there as well. But what advice would you give these guys to make sure that they're focusing on a community that actually understands Kickstarter?
So, I mean, I think you always take some risks, especially when you use a brand that's not a video game brand. I think it's interesting, like Noob, we did 1.5 million, and Homestuck, we did 2 million. Both of them are webcomics. One is web series, one is webcomic. But both of them, the subject matter or the core of their stories is around video game. So for them to try to fund a video game was not a big leap from the core of what they were doing. And I think that's...
Yeah. To reinforce that, my nephew, at the same time we did Rocky Horror, did the Dark Souls board game, and they raised 3.5 million. So,
yeah. So I think it's a matter of, how close is the core audience, the core community to this specific project that you're building. And that's true for video game, for board game, for webcomic or anything like that. And so I think like doing like a Gordon Ramsay video game would probably not be as successful as making something related to Dungeons and Dragons video game, because Gordon Ramsay, population of fans, huge, maybe bigger than D&D, maybe, but not as a good fit. So yeah, that's the kind of like sanity check I would recommend to do, is make sure it fits. No? Oh. Thomas has a question.
I'll repeat the question. Okay, we are on now. Right. So you mentioned that like some of the larger projects, they were held on different crowdsourcing websites. But is that indicative? Okay, what's the actual question? The question is, does the average project between, let's say, Kickstarter and Indiegogo and the other one that you mentioned, is the average funding level different or lower on the ones that are less popular, or is the average funding level like about the same?
The average level is much bigger on Kickstarter.
Right. Okay.
There's a bigger user base. There's more people are more used to that. There's more people who have already their credit card information and details on Kickstarter than the other websites. So on average, they are higher. But that never prevented like a specific project to still be successful somewhere else, because they brought the people in. But for sure, Kickstarter is the better default solution for those reasons as well. And you see that in the average level of games. And I think whenever they have a big success, like Ulule in France is like super excited about the noob video game, because like, now we can do video games. It's like, no, you don't have video game players on your platform. You have fan of noobs who like that webcomic, and they back that video game specifically because they wanted it, but maybe they back never any other video game. So in that sense, and it's true for tabletop game. I'm not talking about tabletop game, but it's huge on Kickstarter. Like it's like 5 times bigger than video games, and so it's much better to do a campaign on Kickstarter for this kind of games if you want to have the less friction as possible.
Right.
And sometimes you have another reason, and then you go for the other platform. Is what happened most of the time. Are we more questions, or are we set? Time to kick me out. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much.